Alrighty, we should be going. Great. All right, and now I'm going to pass it over to our students, interns with the University of Michigan. I believe, Lisa, do you want to tee this up for them?
Sure. I think this project is familiar to a lot of you, but maybe new to some of you. So I'll just give a quick summary and then they'll dive a little bit deeper. But over the last year and a half, we've been working with this wonderful team of master's students from the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability to really look more deeply at how GLBN can work towards building out action on microplastics. So they will walk through their project and all of that, but I just wanted to give a big thank you to this team. They've provided us with a lot of research and recommendations that I think we can really run with and start implementing. And I know a lot of our businesses have participated in this. So a thank you to the researchers and a thank you to all the members who have worked on this project. And if you're interested in getting involved in this work, we have a issue campaign. We've been meeting as a committee monthly or bi-monthly. So shoot me a note if you'd like to learn more, and I'll turn it over to the students.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thanks for letting us chat with you guys today. Um, yeah, we just wanted to give a brief update as we wrap up kind of our capstone project. We are all going to be graduating soon, which is exciting. But I think some of us will continue working on this a little bit throughout the summer, which will be good. Um, yeah, and so for those of you who we haven't been able to talk to about this project yet, it's been kind of a year and a half interdisciplinary project as part of our master's capstone requirement. And we've been working with the GLBN to help kind of increase capacity and start kind of some work on microplastics. And it's been just such a great experience. And we really loved getting to know the GLBN, getting to know some of you guys specifically. And so we're excited to share some of our results and next steps. So, yeah, we could just briefly introduce ourselves really quick because I know that we haven't met everyone, but my name is Meredith King. Um, we are all in School for Environment and Sustainability, but I focus specifically on behavior education and communication, and I'm from Iowa originally. And I'll let Claire introduce herself.
My name is Claire Newman. I'm a student at SEAS, and I focus on environmental policy and planning as well as geospatial data systems. And I'll tee it off to Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm originally from New York and I focused on environmental policy and planning.
And I'm Lily. I'm from Rochester, New York, and I also was focused on environmental policy and planning.
So, yeah, we kind of wanted to just quickly go over what microplastics are. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept and are concerned about the problem, but they're defined as plastic pieces that are less than 5 millimeters in size. And plastic is actually one of the most prevalent debris in the Great Lakes. I'm sure that people who are on the water, you guys have seen a lot of plastic pollution, but it's estimated that 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes annually, which is concerning for lots of reasons. But we know that millions of people and thousands of species rely on the Great Lakes water, and so the health of that water is really important. But in addition, your businesses rely on tourism around the Great Lakes, and you guys have been able to build a strong customer base around the Great Lakes culture. So microplastics have two kind of main sources. So we can go to the next slide here. Great.
Yeah.
So
Are other
primary,
folks, and I just want to check, Claire, did you need to share your screen? Are other folks seeing that?
Yeah, can people see my screen?
I'm seeing the
Oh,
screen.
okay, great.
Working
Yeah.
great. Okay.
Okay, thanks for checking on that. Um, So primary sources of microplastics are intentionally produced for industrial uses. So this includes nurdles, which are small plastic pellets that get melted and molded into other plastic goods. And a lot of times they can be either intentionally or unintentionally spilled during transportation. There's also microbeads, which are commonly found in cosmetics, and then plastic shavings that are a waste product of different like grinding processes. And then there's also secondary sources, which comes from the breakdown of larger plastic pieces into microplastics. Oftentimes, this comes from single-use plastics, from erosion and weathering. But microfibers are also a really big source as well. So the shedding of our synthetic fabrics and textiles every time that we wash them. And then also tires are a common source from constantly being eroded as we drive. Um, and so, to kind of address this growing problem of microplastics pollution, we have been working with all of you, and we've been kind of focusing on network engagement and then qualitative interviews to provide some of the foundational data. So, we've been attending a lot of GLBN meetings, so maybe you've seen some of us before. Also, some in-person events like a beach cleanup last year, a conference, and even a legislative day. And we hope that we have been able to kind of build relationships with some of the businesses, and we think that that will really help contribute to the longevity of this work. But our primary form of data collection came through our interviews that we did this past summer. Um, so we collected a total of 34 separate interviews. 19 of those were with GLBN members like yourselves, and it came from a variety of different industries, as you can see. Um, some of the people that we talked to was kind of just based on availability. We know that some people, like businesses, have very busy summer seasons, and so it could have been hard for us to try to get in contact with everyone. But yeah, we asked, about people's concerns of microplastics, their level of knowledge, different sustainability practices that they're using, and then barriers that they face when trying to reduce their plastic use. And then we also spoke with 8 policy professionals and researchers who we categorized as experts. And this helped us learn about current plastic policies and to also identify knowledge gaps that the GLBN might have. And then lastly, we interviewed 7 like model businesses that we called them. So these businesses who weren't in the GLBN. We did try to recruit some people though, so hopefully we gained some new members for you guys. So they're not in the GLBN, but they do have plastic-free business models that are kind of just like being able to show us best practices and provide practical next steps for GLBN businesses. And so, kind of at the end of this process, we were able to synthesize our results to find common themes that really helped drive the rest of our project forward and helped us figure out what to do next. And so, Claire will kind of get into some of those results next.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. First of all, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have my like people view, so we'll first talk about some of the big takeaways from our results. There are 4 main ones. We will discuss some descriptive statistics about what we found, and then we'll also talk about the webinars, which a lot of you look pretty familiar from those, so that shouldn't be totally news, but that was a really impactful part of our results. So our first big takeaway is that there was an apparent knowledge gap between concern for microplastics and people's awareness and information about the issue. So in every interview, we asked, what is your concern about microplastics on a scale of 1 to 5? And the average response was 4.8, which is very concerned. And we also asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how knowledgeable are you about microplastics? And the average response is 3.2. So we took this to mean that people were really worried about something that they didn't understand, and that the best thing that we could do is provide that information so that we could perhaps alleviate concern and provide information at the same time. This quote from one of the GLBN business owners, kind of highlights this relationship. This person talks about how they know there is a problem and that it's pervasive within the whole ecosystem, and that it acts as an invisible warning. People don't know how to be worried because they just don't know anything about it, and there's no visibility. Our next big takeaway is public health. And so this was something we found pretty commonly across our interviews. Um, these are two quotes. One is from a GLBN business owner and one is from a policy expert. The first describes microplastics as an unknown creepy monster wreaking havoc on our wildlife and on our own bodies, which is a very illustrative way to say that this is scary. And we reflected on that one a lot, and we find we agree. And then the policy expert draws this line between the ecosystem and wildlife, and then how we consume fish and how we spend time in the water, um, and that the microplastics, therefore, are in our bodies and in our brains. And that kind of highlights the relationship between ourselves, our bodies, and the planet. We found that 18 of 33 interviewees mentioned human health as a primary concern. And we found colloquially that a lot of interviewees mentioned a pretty well-known factoid about microplastics that says every year we consume about one credit card's worth of plastic. And that's what the icon in the background is meant to represent. And we found it meaningful that so many people brought this up independently. And that kind of goes to show what the standard knowledge is about microplastics. And I guess we were glad to know people were aware, but the fact that it's such an alarming piece of information was unfortunate. Our next big takeaway is concerns about the bottom line. Of course, you're all businesses, and making ends meet is very critical to your success as a business. And we found that this was represented in many different ways throughout our interviews. So these three quotes highlight the different ways that this is represented. In the first, the business owner talks about how the health of the Great Lakes is imperative and vital to their business. And this would mean that if microplastics became so pervasive in the Great Lakes, it would affect their success as a business. The next quote draws the line between sustainable economic sustainability and environmental sustainability, and how you need to balance the two in order to be successful, but that also you have to be mindful of your financial concerns in order to stay impactful in the sustainability space. And this final quote highlights the fact that it's very difficult to be engaged in sustainability and advocacy if your baseline business is not functioning. And this kind of refers to a concern we heard often, that trying to make the switch to more sustainable alternatives or cutting out plastic or totally turning over your business model in order to be more sustainable can be very expensive. Um, in our research, we found that that's not always true, but we understand that it oftentimes has a lot of overhead when you're trying to make the switch. And so this business owner very astutely pointed out that sometimes that is a huge barrier to getting involved, because you can't help if you don't have a business. And our final big takeaway is a shared concern for the natural environment. This one is not a huge surprise because we're all here because we care about the natural environment, especially our Great Lakes. So this concern about the natural environment showed up in 100% of our interviews. And this quote does a great job, I think, of highlighting that concern. Um, they say that plastic pollution is something that is just anywhere. When you walk around the beach and the Great Lakes, you'll see plastic literally littered all over the place. You will see it on trails. Pretty much everywhere you go, walk, or you're outside, you'll see some form of plastic pollution. And that's from a policy expert, not a business owner, but I feel that a lot of you who spend time outside would probably resonate with the sentiment here. And then finally, our webinars, kind of like I was referring to earlier, we identified a gap between what people knew about microplastics and how worried they were. So part of our solution on the short term was to host some webinars. In our first one, we hosted three experts. We had Christy Tyler, Melissa Duhame, and Tim Minotis, and they kind of outlined the very basics of microplastics, the public health concerns, and then also the current policy space. And then in our second microplastics meeting, we had Motel Bear Lake sharing about their journey to reduce plastic from their business model. And then that was a workshop for the remainder of the time so people could talk with each other and share ideas. And that was one of my favorite parts of this project, is seeing people work together and get excited. So next we'll talk about the policy components of our project.
Yeah, so after we conducted all of these interviews, we created three distinct recommendations that we have for the GLBN, starting with a list of best practices. Then we have our policy recommendations, and finally a campaign plan, which Lily will talk about later. So for the best practices, one of the biggest challenges we saw with microplastic pollution is that once plastic enters the environment, it's very difficult to remove. So we saw prevention as one of the smartest and cost-effective strategies. So we wanted to give you guys a resource and highlight practical steps businesses can take right now. So starting off, making plastic free the default whenever that's possible. So instead of automatically offering single-use utensils, bags, or packaging, providing them only when requested eliminates a lot of unnecessary plastic use. Second, we found that auditing your operations is a really good way to start. A lot of businesses don't realize how many synthetic materials they use. That is often contributing to the microplastic pollution problem. And third, wherever possible, transitioning to alternatives, biodegradable materials, compostable materials, glass, cardboard, wood, etc., makes a really big difference in eliminating microplastic pollution. We also heard from some businesses about the importance of buying in bulk, and that reduces a lot of packaging from suppliers, um, as well as can be more cost effective in the long run. Setting measurable goals was also really important. Gradual reductions in plastic use can create a meaningful impact over time. It doesn't have to be a full overhaul overnight where you eliminate 100% of plastic. But beyond just operations, businesses also have influence through education and advocacy. So engaging your customers, supporting community cleanups, lending your time and voice to policy, which we'll talk about in a minute. That can often create a broader systemic change. Um, and just overall, reducing plastic pollution is not just an environmental issue. We also found that it does strengthen efficiency, reputation, and long-term resilience. So now we can talk a little bit about policy. So when we started to go over just the legislation that's out there that's kind of targeting microplastics, we broke it up into three distinct areas: direct control policies, incentive-based policies, and federal funding. So starting with direct control policies, these are regulations that directly limit or prohibit harmful products or practices. So a ban on certain single-use plastics, um, preventing banning polystyrene. There's a ban on bans, which is also a direct control policy. Second are incentive-based policies. So these often use market signals to encourage better behavior. So reusable packaging incentives. There's a better bottle bill in Michigan, and that's a form of an incentive-based policy, but it kind of makes it easier for businesses to use less plastic. And third is federal funding, so leveraging existing funding from the federal government for microplastic monitoring systems or wastewater treatment upgrades. So we used this to organize our policy matrix, where we have an example of kind of what that looks like. So that helped us decide where our advocacy efforts should focus. These include the status of the bill, the policy objectives, the expected opposition to the bill, the impact on microplastic pollution, and alignment with GLBN's mission. Um, so one that we focused on was the Senate Bill 1531, which had been introduced but not enacted. So it's looking at banning polystyrene, which is really important because polystyrene is one of the main contributors to microplastics. It's lightweight, it breaks apart easily, and that frequently contributes to the microplastic pollution. So we looked at political and market realities of understanding, what legislators would be for or against this, where is the pressure coming from, and that helped us make really informed decisions on what we wanted you guys to support within our campaign plan, and where you guys can add real value. And so I think I'm going to pass it on to Lily now.
All right. So as Lisa had mentioned earlier, we kind of started a microplastics committee within the GLBN to kind of start taking some actionable steps towards launching our campaign plan, which I will discuss momentarily. But this has really just been a group of dedicated members who meet monthly or bi-monthly to work on addressing microplastics in the GLBN. So we've had two meetings so far. One was in January. We just kind of discussed our campaign plan, and we had a lot of time for questions, and sharing stories and ideas. And then our last meeting was in March, and we kind of gave a policy brief on EPR, extended producer responsibility, and use an interactive whiteboard, so that we could have everyone there kind of rank their preferences, and their tactics that we have in our campaign plan and see where businesses can fit in and contribute and make connections with each other. So going forward, we do have our next meeting on Tuesday, April 28th at noon. So if you would like to be involved and get the Zoom link and information about that, please reach out to Lisa. We have a separate mailing group for that, and we promise we don't send too many emails. Um, but this meeting, we really just hope to kind of discuss more federal policies in light of the fly-in that's happening next week, and then just start taking action on some of the tactics in our campaign plan. So the campaign plan, we see this as kind of a roadmap for the GLBN to address microplastics. We've gathered feedback from the network through the committee meetings, through interviews, from policy experts, and from these model or plastic-free businesses to create a roadmap. So the campaign plan is laid out into three distinct goals, each with the situation analysis, strategies, and multiple tactics. So I want to take some time quickly just to walk through each goal and share some of these tactics today. And we will dive deeper into some of this at the committee meeting. But our first goal is advancing microplastics policies at the state level. So the policy section of our campaign plan is a little bit more, has a different format than the next two goals, but we really divided this into sub goals, just kind of laying out which policies we recommend from our policy matrix that we think the GLBN will have the highest influence in advancing. So, for example, we talk about repealing Michigan's ban on bans, passing better bottle bills, and then passing the Michigan microplastics bill package. So this first sub goal is really just kind of packaging all of the Michigan-based plastic legislation together. And then within each kind of sub goal here, we have core messaging. This is kind of where we see the GLBN taking a stance and what kind of point of view we want and think that the GLBN will have success with. So here, these bills just protect tourism, manufacturing, local control, and communities across the Great Lakes. They help keep the Great Lakes clean, which is essential for our businesses. And some tactics here include lobby days in Lansing, sign-on letters, and meetings with legislators with Michigan-based businesses. So in the campaign plan, we do have laid out a bunch of different legislators that we see as champions or targets for these policies. And then our next sub goal here is promoting EPR in multiple different Great Lakes states. So the core messaging here is that the GLBN supports practical and realistic EPR that makes the shift to alternative materials manageable and creates an even playing field across industries. And then some tactics that we think the GLBN will excel in is conducting targeted meetings with legislators and staff to propose a workable EPR, and then utilizing some testimonials from maybe some Minnesota GLBN members about the success of Minnesota EPR, which already has passed, as kind of a model for places like Illinois and Michigan. And our last sub goal here is passing a polystyrene foodware ban in Illinois. The core messaging is that a polystyrene ban is a prevention first policy that removes one of the most harmful plastic products from the waste stream. And some tactics here include engaging with legislators in Illinois, coordinating GLBN businesses to speak on the availability and functionality of polystyrene alternatives, which is kind of where that list of best practices comes in. Our next goal is demonstrating and promoting practical business solutions for reducing plastic use. Sorry, this slide is a bit word heavy, but bear with me here. We have multiple strategies that we can see the GLBN really utilizing. The first is just equipping members with technical expertise and and ability to achieve measurable reductions in plastic use. So we see the committee really playing in here with facilitating discussions to share best practices and work through challenges related to sustainable procurement, which is a topic that we do want to talk about moving forward with the committee. Another strategy is facilitating connections between GLBN businesses in similar industries or locations to tackle shared barriers to plastic reduction. This is definitely a topic that came up a lot in the interviews. So we think it's important to identify GLBN businesses using similar plastic products, and maybe connect them to potentially buy plastic alternatives in bulk. And lastly, highlighting GLBN as the go-to platform for business solutions and sustainability by promoting strategies that reduce plastic use while maintaining economic viability, which is a very important thing for a lot of businesses. So here we see creating a practical, sustainable solutions toolkit as a great resource for businesses. And our last goal with the campaign plan is increasing public awareness, education, and engagement with the GLBN through microplastics prevention strategies. So this is slightly different than goal two. That goal two is more internal within the GLBN, and goal three really kind of works towards engagement outside of the GLBN. So a strategy here is providing opportunities for members to receive education on microplastic pollution from a business perspective. So this could be hosting webinars, and continuing on with that maybe platform that we might have laid down with our past ones, and really kind of connecting with more organizations with those webinars. Another strategy is promoting business interaction through local community events surrounding plastic pollution. The GLBN's already taken a big step on that with a lot of businesses hosting beach cleanups and things like that. But just continuing to do that and maybe connecting businesses here to co-host cleanups or other community events. And lastly, our final strategy here is to make it easy and engaging for businesses to share microplastics information. Obviously, business owners are very busy, so we want to make this as easy as possible. So creating a marketing toolkit with this messaging that can be adapted to each business's voice to allow businesses to reach out to community members, and each other in a easy and accessible way. So our next steps with our project and with this campaign plan in general is that we will continue with the microplastics committee meetings. As I said, the next one is at the end of this month. So if any of these tactics sound interesting to you or you want to take a step in addressing microplastics in the GLBN, highly recommend, again, reaching out to Lisa to be put on the mailing list for that. We see the committee as the driving force behind the campaign plan. So many businesses are already doing some of the tactics that we've mentioned, but we think to kind of gain more momentum and keep it going, we want to continue on with the committee to really implement this campaign plan. So thank you all for being at this meeting today, listening to us share our project. Thank you everyone that participated in our interviews, to everyone that's been coming to the committee meetings, and for everyone's feedback throughout this entire process. Definitely would not be possible without all of your engagement on this topic. And specifically, again, thank you to Lisa for your support and guidance throughout this. These two QR codes just go to our Seeds project page, which has our full report if anyone's interested in reading that. And then the other QR code is just to a website that we made on the GLBN site that's all about microplastics. I will send also the link to both of those in the chat now. But yeah, if you want to learn anything more about the project, feel free to reach out. And I think we might have a little bit of time for some questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's been really fantastic to get to listen in on everything that you've been learning from our members, and then hearing all these policy recommendations is really helpful for future work.
I have a question.
Sure.
So my name's Tom Beckman. I own a Goldfinger Brewing Company in Downers Grove, Illinois. And one of the biggest concerns I have is how microplastics may be getting into our beer. Obviously, there's the source water issue that you've been discussing, but also, is there anything further downstream that we might be doing to make it even worse? Are there any resources or anybody that could help kind of do analyses, or could we send our product somewhere to do tests to give us a better picture on what we're contributing to this problem?
It's a really good question. Yeah, you're right in the sense that there have been several studies that have found microplastics in um, beer and kind of just very pervasive. Um, and there have been, there are some researchers who are doing actual like water quality testing and things like that. Um, but I guess I don't know of any kind of like resources to be able to send products to kind of get like specific testing. That could be another great like next step for the microplastics committee. And I think also some of the policies that we found and like recommend do kind of focus on water quality and like water monitoring. So perhaps that could kind of help address what you're getting at. But if any of the other team members want to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, I think Eagle could be a really good resource. I know that they're doing a lot with microplastic monitoring and drinking water. And there were two bills in the last session that kind of address that and set up a fund to kind of monitor and track that. And so I think they have a lot of great resources on potentially like testing and understanding what's actually in your products.
I'll also just highlight Beth's chat in the or message in the chat.
Yeah, sorry. I think Bells has done a little bit of work on the filtration side, so I'll reach out and connect you both as well.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, I want to keep us moving. I know we have so much more to cover. Thank you all again. That was wonderful. Alrighty. And Lisa, were there any additional restoration updates that we need to cover?
Yes, I will be very brief. Just one quick reminder that our fly-in is next week. We'll be taking 12 members to Washington, D.C. for meetings with members of Congress, so very exciting. If you would like, we are still accepting letters from businesses that we will be delivering to the offices, highlighting the importance of the Great Lakes and Great Lakes protection or any issues that you want to talk about to your business. So if this is something that you're interested in, we'll provide the template in the chat, or you can reach out to me for more information, and we're happy to support you in that. Another plug to join the microplastics email list. If you're interested in hearing more about those updates, we're trying to sort of streamline communications and avoid spamming the full network with a million emails. So we don't send that many, but it's more targeted. And then just a couple of things we're watching at the federal level with policy. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative reauthorization is in process. The House has passed a reauthorization bill. And again, this basically sets the maximum amount of funding that can be appropriated each year for 5 years at a time. So this reauthorization would reauthorize the maximum funding amount for the federal funding that supports Great Lakes protection, restoration, all of those agencies that are carrying out research, staff. It's very important. So if you have not already, this is a great time to reach out to your senators and ask them to support a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative reauthorization bill. And we'll be sending more information about this in the newsletter. But just something to keep an eye on. We're also watching some of the federal microplastics bills. There's about four of them at the moment, and we will dive deeper into this at our microplastics committee meeting. But I just wanted to highlight this will be something we're talking about next week with offices. Um, I haven't heard that the boundary waters went to a vote yet. Someone can jump in if I missed an update. But there's also a really urgent action at this moment to call your senators and ask them to protect the boundary waters from being opened up for mining and extraction. I think it was yesterday. We heard that today, this morning, there was likely to be a vote. So it's really an urgent action. And I see Beth in the chat, please keep calling. So just a plug there. If you need more information, we can provide some talking points or a script. And then we're just keeping an eye on some of the fiscal year 27 budgeting coming out of the White House. The first budget that was released by the president had massive cuts to agency agencies and programs and clean water initiatives. So we'll be doing a lot of organizing and advocacy throughout these next few months, trying to preserve some of the science that protects the Great Lakes. And then lastly, we've had some opportunities for collaboration with PFAS and agriculture focus. So if this resonates with you, please reach out and we're happy to provide more information. But there's some opportunities for congressional meetings, fly-ins, and general support from both GLBN and our partners at the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. So that was quick. I'm happy to talk separately if others have questions or need more information.
And I'll jump in real quick on line 5 and ask Andy to maybe help me a little bit on this. So I'm going to highlight 3 specific cases that have happened in the last few months that are really important and moving forward and really need some engagement right now. First, just naming that last month, the Michigan Attorney General was before the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that that Michigan and Enbridge that a case needs to come back to state court that is being considered for federal jurisdiction. This was very much like a technical question, but one that has a ripple effect throughout many of the cases on line 5, and so we're watching it closely. And many of us were able to be in the room. Coupled with the U.S. Supreme Court oral arguments that happened last month, we also started a process of strategic planning around Line 5 and over the next year into 2028, and making sure that we are doing all of the things in coordination with a larger coalition. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But sticking with the legal lane, another big monumental moment happened last month where many groups and the tribes went before the Michigan Supreme Court to argue that some of the permitting around the Line 5 tunnel alternative has alarmingly ignored pretty critical laws and requirements for review, including a review of need, a review of climate impacts, and some review of harm. And so that case, even being heard before the Michigan Supreme Court, is very favorable, and we are hoping that we have a good decision and that some of the permitting that was shortcut early in the process has to go back to be reviewed. And then the other big legal or judicial thing that is happening at this moment is a review of the Eagle permits. So about a year ago, the Eagle permits were thrown back to the agency for the tunnel review because they, again, at Enbridge's request, ran a really short-cutted permit review, and so they've had to redo their permits. A recent Eagle comment period ended this past fall winter, where there were tens of thousands of comments going in urging Eagle to have a much more extensive permit review, including a full extensive review of the Submerged Lands Act, which protects the Great Lakes against really industrial and extractive industries like a tunnel project. And Eagle has heard the comments, and over the last few months, they have extensively grown out the permitting review process for the tunnel. And we are hopeful that later this year there may even be a denial that comes from that review, because Enbridge has revealed, even in the last few weeks, some pretty alarming information that has never been seen before that talks about the risks that the tunnel poses because of some of the geological formations in that area, showing that the project has not been proven feasible and could take upwards of a decade with extensive damage to the area and the local communities. And so we continue to work on all of those issues, but in particular with Eagle, we feel there is a huge moment in this time to be persuasive and ensure that Eagle is standing up for Great Lakes laws and protections and communities over the interests of Enbridge and the corporation. And so we continue to call for folks to reach out to Eagle and ask for them to deny that project. And then more importantly, or equally, we are asking folks to make connections with the governor and to encourage the governor to also support an Eagle denial of the tunnel proposal and to continue advocacy and legal actions to actually remove Line 5 from the Straits of Mackinac. And coupled with that, there is going to be, and there is right now, quite a bit of advocacy around trying to get lawmakers and decision makers to move a regional economic plan that supports an orderly shutdown of Line 5. An orderly shutdown of Line 5 means that we're upholding Great Lakes laws, that we're transitioning to more reliable and safer energy sources. It means Enbridge can utilize their own pipelines. And so we'll be sharing a lot of information. As Zoe mentioned at the top of the hour, we have some pretty good one-page info sheets to share on this issue along with our others, as well as some expert reports. But just wanted to name that we are still really heavy into the advocacy at the state level in particular. And then next week, when we're in DC, we'll be taking a lot of the regional economic solutions to DC, asking for them to support an orderly shutdown of Line 5 and asking them to support the state of Michigan's rights to remove Line 5 altogether. So this is kind of a recap of how the strategic plan shaped up and where a lot of the coalition is heading. We really want to advocate that there are solutions locally and that the agencies need to follow Great Lakes laws and uphold Great Lakes protections in this moment, as well as honor tribal sovereignty and tribal rights, which at all fronts, when it comes to the Straits Tunnel proposal or the Bad River Band reroute, there is a huge attack right now on tribal rights that is also heavily embedded in this. And we just have a couple minutes, but Andy, is there anything you would add to what I just
You
mentioned?
you covered it really well, Beth. Just want to emphasize that there's a lot of legal activity right now that GLBN is just critical to. The if you kind of follow through Beth's summary, there are some major cases. Of course, the U.S. Supreme Court case. There's also one in the U.S. Court of Appeals, the Sixth Circuit, which is incredibly important for actually shutting down the existing line. There's a whole suite of other activities going around in terms of stopping the tunnel permit that, which involves some advocacy activity, but the legal cases are absolutely essential. And the Attorney General's office has repeatedly asked for support in the form of Friends of the Court brief from the Great Lakes Business Network. And I'd like to think it's, the great legal work that we're providing, but actually the real reason is because there's lots of business opposition to our position. There's lots of businesses from the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry that are supporting Enbridge in these legal fights. And the Great Lakes Business Network is the only business group that is on the side of shutting down Line 5. And that's incredibly important. That your voice is incredibly important before the court because you're providing a different viewpoint from the business community. To let the courts know that it's not the fossil fuel industry does not represent all or even the majority of Michigan's and the nation's businesses. So it's incredibly important what GLBN's position is on this, and the Attorney General's office always asks us to please submit friend of the court's brief because of that.
Yeah, great. Just thanks, Andy. And in addition to all that we've mentioned, we're also doing a lot of candidate education, as Zoe mentioned, trying to get candidates right now to see the bigger picture and understand the importance of this moment to uphold Great Lakes laws and tribal sovereignty. So yeah, any support you all are willing to provide, including we're doing ad placements. If you'd like to sponsor an ad, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
If I could have one more thing to that. This is not just candidates supporting new initiatives going forward. If the governor or the attorney general decides to pull the plug on the litigation, then all of the litigation work that we're doing before the U.S. Supreme Court, the Sixth Circuit, the federal courts, the state courts, it all goes away. A governor or attorney general can unilaterally withdraw from a lawsuit, meaning that Enbridge would no longer have any chance of being compelled to shut down Line 5. So making sure that the governor's candidates and the AG's candidates stay solidly behind this is absolutely essential for us to have any chance to shut down Line 5.
Thank you. And Zoe, sorry, I know we're giving you just a little bit of time.
I will make do. We may go over by a few minutes, so hopefully folks can just stick around for the last few updates. So there's a lot happening in clean energy. In Michigan, unfortunately, the House Republicans have introduced a bill to repeal the 2023 clean energy laws that Governor Whitmer put in place and that have been essential for moving our economy forward in a clean energy direction and having less pollution and carbon accountability. We know that the situation that we are in with rising energy costs is certainly due to our reliance on fossil fuels. And so there is a sign-on letter that I want to share with folks, calling for folks in Lansing. So this is for our Michigan people, to stop this attack on clean energy, deny what they have called Project Lights Out. So if folks don't mind taking a moment to sign that, we would greatly appreciate it. We certainly want to preserve those 2023 clean energy laws. Although this bill would likely be vetoed by Whitmer, we want to show solidarity for it. Another action that's happening is the Energy Bills Relief Act. So this is a federal act. It's certainly focused on building more clean energy. It's focused on creating clean energy projects and building out the transmission and updating our grids. There's a fair bit in there around data center accountability as well, and putting in real protections to keep energy bills down. So this is like an updated version of what we saw under President Biden with the Inflation Reduction Act. It does not have a lot of momentum at the moment because, of course, we know the Democrats who introduced this bill do not have all the power they need to perhaps move it forward. But we are certainly going to be defending it when we are in DC because we do believe that this legislation is really important, of course, for acting on climate change and defending or protecting the Great Lakes, as well as defending our local economy and the clean jobs economy that has really been booming in the Great Lakes region. I just want to highlight that proposed budget cuts are happening for 2027, and there's definitely some slashing that is unfavorable to the work we're doing. We've already seen a proposed cut to the EPA. I believe it's again around like 40 or 50% slash to their budget. And we know that the EPA has already lost more than 4,000 employees in 2025, putting it at its lowest workforce level since the 1980s. Additionally, there's cuts to renewable energy funding and other programs like LIHEAP, which help homeowners access energy efficiency updates. So there's a lot that we will be doing likely around budget discussions. Lastly, I'll just share that Earth Day is coming up, and our friends at Climate Action Campaign have a letter that will be sent to Congress. This is an opportunity just to tell Congress that we need relief from high energy bills and that we believe the best way to do this is by implementing more clean energy solutions. So feel free to take action on that. And then real quick, before our time is up here, there's just a few events we want to highlight. We're excited to be presenting to the Manistee Tourism Association. That will be over Zoom. And this is just a reminder that if you're on any local boards or associations that you think would be interested in learning more about GLBN, we're happy to work on that with you. We also have the Energy Emergency webinar, which we're really excited about. We have Attorney General Dana Nessel, Doug Jester from Great Lakes Energy, Courtney Brady from Evergreen Action. So a lot of amazing heavy hitters from the Great Lakes region joining us to talk about the false energy solution, which is the doubling down on fossil fuels and what we see as the real energy solution, which is the need for clean energy investment. And so we hope you can join us. That is on that is May 7th at noon. And I'm putting all the links to all of these fun activities in the chat as I go. And then we do have a Chicago beach cleanup. We're partnering again with the folks at Half Acre. So we're super excited to get out there and hopefully have some beautiful weather, pick up all that microplastic pollution and drink some beer afterwards. And lastly, I'll just put a plug in. Our partners at the National Wildlife Federation have a data center webinar tonight. It's at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So hopefully folks could maybe tune in while they're cooking dinner, something like that. And this is focusing on the climate impacts and energy use of data centers. I believe that wraps everything I had for folks. Sorry to fly through that there at the end. Thank you to those that were able to stay over by just a few moments. And I believe we'll wrap unless anyone has anything they want to flag for us.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.